Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to share some thoughts and theories I have about what we could see and what could potentially happen in season 3 of The Boys. Obviously, if you've not seen season 2, all of season 2, do not watch this because we're going to be tackling some spoilers, obviously. So just letting you know ahead of time. But obviously one of the things I want to talk about first, potentially about season 3, is Huey's mom. Now, I've talked about it before, like I was probably going to listen to other reviews just to hear what other people's thoughts were about the season finale. And one particular group I listened to was like the Cyber Nerds. I listened to their review of the season finale. I actually listened to their other reviews as well. But particularly with the season finale, they brought up an interesting point, because I had a feeling like because they brought up Huey's mom, I felt like that was going to like turn into something. But obviously it's kind of this interesting thing about, well, will it turn into something or not? Because obviously that was a conversation between them. Like, you know, I think like Sam was kind of suggesting, like, because the show it's done the family thing with other people, whether it's Mother's Milk, whether it's Billy, like they brought up the whole family thing. I mean, to be fair, they did the same thing with Frenchie to a certain extent, and like what was essentially his family. So bringing up Huey's is just kind of along with the theme of the season. Whether it actually becomes something more or not is going to be the thing. And obviously I'll tell you what I wrote in a comment, because someone had thrown it out there like I'm kind of crazy for thinking this. But one random thought that popped in my head the moment they were having that conversation, I was like, is it going to be a reveal, an interesting reveal when we find out who Huey's mom is? Like I said, nothing in the show suggests this, but my mind immediately went to Cindy. Why? Because obviously because of Stormfront, we know that, you know, obviously Stormfront situation is a little different, but it's like because of her healing factor or whatever, she doesn't age. So part of me, I mean, as we know, like Cindy got shot, so it's still unclear fully what everyone's thing is, like why some heroes are kind of bulletproof and crowbar proof while others aren't in certain aspects. But part of me was wondering, like, she survived Stormfront's electrocution. Some people had suggested maybe that's because Stormfront was fronting and that was part of the plan, but it seems like that's not the case. Maybe the reason why Cindy was able to exist, like stop it, because she has a strong healing factor. So, but someone had suggested like Cindy's like 20. My mind immediately, I was like, oh, I assumed Cindy was like in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. So if she doesn't age, like maybe that's a possibility. Like I said, it's a random thought I threw out there about that. But another angle I went about it, like saying, like I said, that's just one thought I had. Another thought was, obviously now that Huey's working with Victoria, he might end up crossing paths with his mom. So she might end up being like a politician or something. So that might be how Huey's story kind of ends up colliding with his mom. Like I said, because it's just, like, maybe it won't be anything. Because obviously it's meant to explain like why Huey kind of doesn't give up on people and why he can be quote unquote clingy a little bit. Like that's what it's meant to be the explanation for. But part of me wonders, like, is it going to be a means of kind of giving him a little closure like Billy got? I mean, granted, it's not fully closure because obviously like nothing settled between him and his dad. But we understand where his mom is coming from. Billy's mom was coming from when she was trying to reunite them and stuff like that. So part of me's wondering, like, is it going to be in a similar vein with Huey's mom, like potentially her being brought up in season 3 and appearing in season 3 just to give him a little closure? Or is it going to be revealed that maybe she's someone important? I'm curious, because they could obviously do a little bit of like, you know, how they're handling like Annie's situation with her mom. There's also the whole conversation about her dad too, because like her dad left, and it's like, is he gonna pop back in the story, you know, her being a part of the 7 and stuff like that, with everything about Vought being out in the open? Like, is he gonna come, like, you know, that's a big question as well. So I'm curious to see whether or not there ends up being anything being done with Huey's mom or not, whether that's just like a small plot point that will eventually turn to something bigger, or maybe, like I said, whether it's a big reveal or whatever. I'm curious to see. Next thing is Victoria herself. Obviously that, you know, I didn't see that twist coming, it being revealed that she's the one popping heads. That was really interesting. Obviously, like, a lot of people are kind of suggesting, like, maybe, like, because we still don't know what her true motives are, because obviously she's doing this whole thing about taking down Vought, and obviously she was working with the church, but then she killed Alistair. So it's like, why did she do that? Is it because, and someone had suggested because the church obviously has like a lot of dirt on people, so maybe it's a thing of she killed him because it's like, oh, I don't want you. But it's like, because for one, that doesn't erase all that, it doesn't erase all the, that information. So killing him doesn't do anything. unless it's because he's the only person that knows about her. Because a suggestion I'd wondered was that basically what went down in that courtroom with all the heads popping, that maybe the church set that up. Because someone else had also pointed it out. One of the people that died was Soundwave. That allowed A-Train, that left a vacancy in the 7 for A-Train to return. So that made that a little bit easier, especially now that Stormfront's removed. It made that transition, you know, easier. So it's like maybe Alistair went to her to do that whole thing to kind of cause that situation. Obviously, put Vought in a position where maybe they were in debt to him, and it's like now Stan, I mean, because the conversation never came up between Stan and Alistair about that, so that's what I'm curious, you know, whether there's any validity to that. But also, you know, something I brought up in this, you know, my review of the season 2 finale was, what is Victoria's power? Because obviously she has a very similar power to Cindy, but it's different. Because when we saw her, she didn't have her hand up like Cindy does when she pops people's heads. It's just like her eyes kind of glazed over and they kind of changed. My thought immediately was like, I think the examples I use is, I thought she's kind of like Rogue, where she absorbs abilities. And obviously I made the comparison to Peter from the TV show Heroes. Like, I'm wondering, does she absorb abilities? Is that what that is? I mean, another thing is, because obviously Cindy's the failed injection, so it's like maybe in actuality Edgar, like maybe she actually is like the perfect subject, in the sense that like where Cindy's a failure, maybe Victoria is the success. You know, maybe she was in St. Grove, but I feel like if she was in St. Grove, like in that facility, they would have known, like they'd have records of her and stuff like that. So that's why I'm curious, like what her situation is. Like, has she always been a soup, or, you know, or has she, because obviously that brings up a question too, like how many soups are out there that like Vought has no idea exists, because obviously they're the company that runs superheroes, so of course they'd be in the know. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of superheroes out there, because obviously like before she was doing her whole superhero thing before, so I mean, I'm sure there's plenty that, but you'd at least think there's some that to be aware of. So maybe she's kept her stuff like super low key that they've never known. Or the thing is, like, has she been working with Vought? But then it's like, why would Vought? Well, because she's going about destroying Vought, but the fact of the matter is she ended up killing the people that would be the destruction of Vought. Someone had suggested that maybe it's because Home Dude, Vogelbaum, knew that her whole situation, and that's why you killed him. Or maybe that's why you killed all the other people, to stop the reveal about like what your true intentions are. Like, or maybe it's a thing of you can't fully control it, and maybe at that time she couldn't. I don't know. Because it also brings back the thing of Raynor. Because obviously the whole red herring was Cindy, so it's, and that's what I thought. Like, what was it, Cindy that actually killed Raynor? Did Stormfront bring her out to do that? Did Vought bring her out to do that? Or was it Victoria the entire time? A lot of questions on that front. And since we are talking about Vought, obviously Vought has done a lot this past season to kind of get from under these situations. The whole thing with Compound V, and then now there's a whole thing of, oh right, you had a Nazi amongst your ranks. So it's like, obviously they've talked about the character that's going to pop up next season, Soldier Boy, who's played by Jensen Ackles. And the fact of the matter is, like, people have suggested, like, obviously he's kind of like a Captain America character, so they're supposed to be like, you think we're Nazi lovers? No, we're super anti-Nazi. Look at this all-American hero. Which begs the question, I mean, because Homefront's supposed to be that, but it's like he's probably taking a step back because they can't have him be the poster child of it anymore, simply because, let's not forget, it was super public about him and Stormfront. So it could be a thing of like, yeah, she lied and everything, and that could be like the spin they take with it. But to be fair, it's still not, it's the perception still gonna be like, oh, you were dating a Nazi. It's like, did you not know, or did you know? So that becomes a question too, I think. So maybe that's why they're bringing in Soldier Boy to represent that. And especially if like you go by like apparently like some of the stuff that's come out about his situation, like he's kind of like Stormfront, he hasn't really aged. Because also they have also talked about the comic book version where there's like multiple Soldier Boys, and that this is the first one. Maybe, you know, it's going to be interesting to see like what they end up doing with this character. Maybe making another character, like, especially because Homelander has nothing now. All he has is the love and admiration he has from the people, so he's going to try and keep that, because he doesn't have Stormfront, he doesn't have Doppelganger to play, you know, Stillwell anymore. Doesn't have Stillwell herself. He doesn't even have his son. So that begs the question, like, he needs something to latch onto, and that's the love of the people. So, you know, is that going to be, you know, Soldier Boy going to steal that thunder from him? Kind of similar to how Stormfront did. I didn't even think about the pun there, you know, Thunder, Stormfront. whatever. But nevertheless, I'm curious to kind of see what role he plays and like, you know, how VODs, I mean, because obviously we see them digging themselves out of the hole, but it's like, it's controversy after controversy, which you can obviously make that be like a bigger commentary about like how a company will spin any situation. It's like, can you really be taking any company for their face value? Because it's like, yeah, controversy after controversy, like, you know, when there's smoke, you know, there just might be a fire type of situation, you know, so I'm curious to see how they handle that. Another thing to talk about is the church. Now, I got this idea because like I was listening to the cyber nerds talk about this, and I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, the Deep didn't get back inside of the the Seven, but obviously now that Alistair's dead, some people, they had suggested like, hey, what if the Deep ends up being the forefront to it? Like, he doesn't have to be the actual, like, oh, he's more so like the face of the operation. It's like, let him kind of be the leader, but it's like, truth be told, it's the church is the one that's going to, because with his power, especially because they brought this up on the Cyber Nerds, and I thought it was a beautiful point, was like, not beautiful in the sense that like, he has already put in the groundwork to fix his reputation. So if you use him as the poster child, the face of your company, like, it can mean a lot. They've even suggested, and I thought this was actually a dope thing, what if the Deep starts his own version? Basically, they're the Justice League. What if he starts the Avengers or something like that to kind of compete against him? It's like, oh, you don't want me to be a part of the Seven? Fine, fuck you. I'm gonna do my own thing, you know? But it's like, we're talking about the Deep here. He's an idiot. He's and they'd also throw this out here too, which you can't forget, is like, because of who Deep is, like, you put him in a powerful position, like, he already abused his power before. Yeah, he hit the rock bottom like multiple times, but who's to say he's still like, oh, I'm back, I got this power? Who's to say? We know how he is with women, so that might kind of come back up because of him now having power and being in this powerful position. Because obviously he talked about the fact is, it's like, oh, he's married to a woman that can't even give a good blowjob is kind of what he was getting. Like, he was bringing that up to Alistair. So obviously he shows you where his priorities are. But obviously, you know, he never believed in all of this. He just wanted, because he flips so quickly, because he turned on like the Archer dude. He was super pissed the moment he found out A-Train was getting back in. So he's quick to be like, nah, fuck that person, screw them, they're toxic, remove them from my life type of situation. Just because, you know, he's still the selfish bastard he's always been. So I'm curious to kind of see what that story ends up being, whether that, you know, the church ends up being a bigger thing next season or not. I think there's so much room for that to continue to be I mean, even if it's not a big thing, because even this season, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a big thing, but maybe next season we find out it was a lot. I mean, it played pivotal roles in certain aspects of this season, so we could easily see it kind of continue in that same vein, or maybe it becomes a lot more of a more mainstream aspect of the next season. Another thing to bring up about season 3 potentially is the Ryan situation, because that's been a big debate amongst people too. It's like, what's Ryan's situation going to be like? Are we going to get time with him, or is it going to be a situation where it's like he disappears from the story? Like, obviously it's like Mallory's raising him instead of Butcher, which is like, some people are like, they think it's more interesting if Butcher had raised him, but at the end of the day, it's like Butcher trying to do the right thing, because, you know, obviously like Butcher's like, I'm too messed up to raise some kid, especially the kid that killed a woman I love, that killed my wife. Yes, it wasn't his fault, and yes, Butcher's on his way to forgiving him, but it's still there. So it's like, me being as messed up as I am, so that you don't end up being, as he said, don't be a cunt. Like, it's not going to be the easiest thing for him to like raise a kid right, because he has so many issues. He's messed up in his own right. So it's like, who am I to raise this kid right? You know, because that also begs the question, like, who would have actually raised the kid better? Like, if we compared, you know, Butcher and Homelander, who would have actually messed the kid up more on a psychological level? And it's like, honestly, I'm sure some people will be like, it's not as clear cut as you think. You're like, no, Butcher would do a better job than Homelander. The question is like, would he? But with all of that becomes a big question, you know, like, regardless of whether we see Ryan or not next season, the question becomes like, obviously Mallory being the one that's kind of quote unquote raising him. I mean, maybe this could be a way of almost making up for the fact is obviously her grandchildren were killed by Lamplighter. So maybe this could be a way of kind of her filling that void a little bit, kind of almost being like a grandmother again. And maybe Ryan's about the same age, so maybe we could see a story arc where that's kind of what they're setting up potentially, which is going to be interesting. I mean, I'm saying that suggesting Mallory is the one to raise him. Who's to say that he won't be, you know, there's like some other, like either some other CIA agent that kind of fill that role kind of as parents, like, because also they have to be careful. Hey, let's not make the same mistake of, you know, now, well, he's aware of his circumstances now. So it's like building a fake life to make him feel like, oh, like this is my life. and obviously he knows the truth now, so it's not going to be that easy to do that. But also they have to make sure they keep him in a place where Homelander won't come after him. I mean, to be fair, you know, Homelander might still try to find him just to be able to be like, you're my son, and try and win him back. But it's like, at that moment, Ryan made his choice. I don't see Homelander, you know, obviously changing his mind. He might not even believe that he can change his mind because he's probably like, it's too late. So maybe in Homelander's mind, his son's dead to him. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm curious to see kind of how they handle that in the grand scheme of things. But it would be interesting too if like they did give him like that kind of pseudo fake life again, or rather like someone that's kind of having to raise him, like, you know, whether they're like actual parents that are found to raise him while the CIA keeps tabs on Ryan from time to time. I don't know. I'm curious to see how they handle that, especially if Mallory is balancing that while potentially, you know, working with the boys, because obviously, like, you know, Victoria's leading a group to keep superheroes in check. And it's actually interesting because I didn't know this, because obviously I haven't read the comic book that this is based on, but apparently in the comic books where this is at right now is actually where the comic book actually starts at. They are a government funded organization, which I think is so interesting. It's kind of similar to Preacher in that regard, because technically the season finale of Preacher season 1 and kind of like where season 2 starts is kind of where the comic book starts. So it's almost interesting that they're kind of doing, obviously, like from what I've heard from people, this is diverted quite a bit from the comic book, but it's kind of interesting because obviously that being a Garth Ennis comic book as well, much like Preach. So it's just interesting that they kind of do a similar thing. It's different, but it's just interesting. It's almost kind of that thing of like, oh, the comic book actually starts where your story is at right now after 2 seasons. I just thought that was just kind of a fascinating aspect to it. I should also circle back. Let's not forget Ryan's also got to deal with the fact is his guilt over, you know, killing his mom. Like, regardless of what Butcher says, and now he has that necklace, which is, you know, going to be a reminder of his mom in both the good and the bad aspect of it, because it's like, you know, I wasn't with my mom. Like, I actually ran away with Homelander and Stormfront, and because I was so upset with my mom, and it's just like they had their moments together, but it still doesn't make up for the fact is he wasn't reunited with her long enough, you know. And it's like now she's gone, and obviously it's like I'm the one that killed her, so he has to live with that guilt, you know. And obviously, like a lot of people over the course of the show have had to deal with their own guilt, you know. Obviously we see adults in the show not handling it well. We've seen superhero adults not handling it well, so a superhero kid, that's going to be interesting. Like I said, but that's something they really tackle in the next season or not. I mean, whether or not they really show it, maybe that's a future plan, but whether or not that still kind of sets up this interesting thing. It makes you wonder, will Ryan tie into like the spin-off that we're going to make? I mean, it could be like a time skip later on down the road. I doubt it. It'll probably still be set present day, or maybe it'll be in the past, but obviously there's like that college level of like, oh yeah, superhero college or whatever. So I'm curious like what elements they'll implement from the main show into that, you know, and what capacity, everything kind of, you know, time frame, and what characters we get to see in that, you know, I'm curious. But circling back to the boys themselves, that becomes a big question. As we see, like, everyone kind of had their happily ever after to a certain extent. Like, obviously Butcher doesn't, and obviously that's just going to sink him deeper. But maybe the situation with Ryan might have fixed some of that. I mean, granted, it still doesn't stop, like, this is all Homelander's fault in his eyes. So I'm sure he's not going to stop, especially, like, you know, it's kind of like, all right, I'm ready to kind of knock some Supes out, you know, when they get out of line. But also that's the thing, because obviously he has a very negative perception of Supes, but obviously, you know, and people brought this up, it's like obviously like he's grown closer to Starlight because they love and care for Huey, but also, you know, it's just he realizes obviously not all Supes are bad, you know. Obviously he has 2 on his side, well, 1 right now, Kimiko, but it's like Starlight was there for a while. So, but obviously it's like Mother's Milk is back with his kid. You know, will he walk away from that? But that's the whole conversation about what he would describe as a disease, that regardless of everything, yeah, they were able to stop Vought for now, but it's not enough. So it's like, I'm reunited with my family, I can't do this. But there's always going to be that part of Mother's Milk that's going to be like, MM's going to be like, I need to do this, because he's trying to break that cycle, because he doesn't want this disease that went from his dad to him. Because we still don't know, because obviously Mother's Milk was like, there's some bad shit that went down between my Vought and my family. He's like, I'd really rather not go into it, but I'm curious, are we going to go into it? That might be the motivating factor into him potentially joining the boys again. You know, it's got to be something to really pull him away from his kid, but it also might be seeing Vought, so finding everything, it might just start hitting at him and just a reminder like, my dad's dead. But it's like, obviously this whole thing is about revenge, doesn't get you anywhere. So there's all of that. But then there's also the situation of like, you know, Frenchie and Kimiko, they're off. Like, I feel like you could probably potentially bring them back before you would mother's milk. I mean, who knows? But I mean, it's like, you know, the time they spend together, like what that necessarily looks like. Obviously, Kimiko, like, kind of, you know, lost the only family she had left. And Frenchie, obviously, we learned about his past, like, you know, he no longer has a family he once had, you know, his Golden Girls. So now the question is becoming, like, you know, now that they have each other, they're each other's family, and you know what that means. Like, now that they're actually able to communicate through her sign language, you know what that means for their story. You know, it would be kind of interesting. And obviously, like, is Huey going to get drafted? Well, because obviously he's keeping his distance from the boys, but obviously, you know, some people have suggested obviously because of Victoria, he's going to end up becoming the inside mole, because he'll be the one that maybe potentially finds out the truth about her. Which now, with all that said and done, because Cindy is still out there, like I said, I threw out their wild, you know, possibility of that being his mom. I know it's crazy, but, you know, like I said, it's just a random thought. With her out there, obviously Victoria could easily skew things to be like she's the bad guy, because it's like she's the one that we've seen pop people's heads, you know. So there's still room for that. I mean, in general, like, if obviously, like, ignoring my crazy thought, it's like, what will they end up doing with Cindy? You know, besides her just being the red herring, she's out there, out and about. Like, maybe she went back to her family. Maybe we see her kind of super villain it up next season. What about the rest of the people, the other people at that facility? You know, like, what about them? I'm sure maybe Vought gets a new facility to continue doing what they're doing, trying to increase the potency of V so that you can use them on adults. But it's like, with everything that's come out, like, obviously there's spots kind of blown up. Obviously Edgar's probably not too happy, but obviously once again he's able to spin things. You know what season 3 has in store for Edgar? Like, are we going to see more of him and what that necessarily looks like? It's going to be interesting. Obviously, Huey and Starlight's relationship. Like, obviously, it's like we're trying to be the good guys now, but it's like she's part of Vought, but Vaught's kind of been put in the spotlight, so they won't be doing anything too shady right now. So, but both of them wanting to do the right thing. We've kind of done a lot of bad to do good. So it's like, how about we just do good to do good? So, you know, Huey wants to do the right thing now, try to go about doing things the right way, and obviously the Starlight as well. So, but them being in basically the lion's den on both cases of, like, you know, Starlight still being with the Seven being kind of still as messed up as it is, but also Huey with Victoria, who's got her own plan. Some people suggesting maybe this is her, like, bid for, like, trying to aim for, like, higher up in the political range of, you know, becoming president and all that. You know, beyond that, we still don't fully know. But speaking of the Seven, you know, and I brought this up during my review, it's like, what about Homelander? He knows that Maeve's got dirt on him. He knows Starlight's a traitor. Like, the Seven, especially because it's like, you kicked A-Train out, he's back. That's going to lead to some stuff. Noir's still in a coma. Stormfront, some people suggest, because obviously, like, I wondered whether or not he had lied about the fact is, like, oh, she's locked away. But it's like, some people had suggested, like, she got Vadered, so we could easily see her coming back with, like, you know, in a Vader fashion. But it's like, what about that? Because I also should point out, it's actually interesting. So some people had translated, like, immediately after, like, what she was saying when she was out. Basically, it was her reminiscing about her with was it Frederick, the founder of Vought, who she was married to? It was just her kind of reminiscing about a moment, like, oh yeah, like, you know, it was her kind of in her, I guess, in her damaged state, she was just kind of a little, like, out of it. So she just, obviously she was speaking German, but also, like, she was reminiscing about, like, a moment between her. So it's almost like, you know, she was so out of it, she was looking at Homelander, I think, and was thinking of, you know, Frederick, you know, because that was her love. It gave her a daughter and everything, you know. So that's what I'm curious about, you know, on that front, like, what they end up doing with Stormfront, but also, like, what the Seven looks like. Because obviously it's like the Deep isn't back, like I said, Black Noir is out of commission, so it's like, what other soups are we going to see get brought into the fold? But also, like, the 3 remaining people right now in the Seven aren't people that Homelander likes. 2 are traitors, and 1 is a person he doesn't care for because he kicked him out, and obviously that's going to cause complications between Homelander and A-Train, especially just, like, how menacing Homelander is. Also, the big question is, what is Ashley going to do? With this all being said and done, as I brought up, she was literally, in my review, she was literally losing her hair, so it's like, this job is super stressful, and it's like, everyone's saying it, Ashley, get out. Especially with Homelander literally having lost his damn mind, being just all over the place like he is, that's just going to be a nasty situation. He's going to, like, you know, what is Homelander going to be like next season? You know, surrounded by people he can't trust. All he has is his love. So he won't get too out of line because Maeve's got her blackmail. But also, like, if he snaps and loses it, hey, And it's interesting because people reference, like, you know, Edgar's line where he was like, oh, you want me to, like, get mad and upset about the whole Stormfront thing? He's like, no, getting angry is a white man's privilege. So it's like Homelander might be able to kind of get away with it. Obviously, Edgar has to be a lot more calm and composed. Obviously, that being, you know, commentary in itself. But then, like, I'm curious, is that in particular going to play a role in season 3, that line in particular, and what that kind of means for Homelander? Will he be a little more, will there actually be a little more leeway about his eruptions? I mean, to be fair, his eruptions can lead to a lot of people getting killed, because obviously, like, Homefront, because that's actually what people were calling Homelander and Stormfront. I think that was their ship name, because a lot of people have been making that mistake of saying Homefront, but Homelander has kind of just given up potentially. So we saw them, just that psychotic look in his eyes in the season finale when it was zooming in. So what that looks like for him next season, a lot of questions. I'm really excited and curious to see what season 3 has in store for us. Like I said, these are just my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. What are some things you want to see in season 3? What are some things you expect to see in season 3? Let me know. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.